We were pulling up to our lake house after the first family vacation we'd had in years. My daughter was laughing in the back seat, and then she screamed. A demolition crew was smashing our home into pieces. The HOA sent them to demolish my lake mansion over a $70,000 fine I never even owed, because I'm not even in the HOA. This wasn't just a house. It's where I spread my brother's ashes after he died overseas. The HOA president thought she had me cornered, but she had no idea what her little mistake was about to cost her, or what I was about to do with her entire neighborhood. Where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments, because this whole takedown is about to get brutal. And if you believe homeowners should have the power to fight back against tyrants like this, smash that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens when they mess with the wrong guy. The air inside the truck smelled like beef jerky and pine trees, the official scent of a successful family road trip. My wife, Sarah, was humming along to some old song on the radio, and our daughter Marissa was in the back, scrolling through pictures from our 2 weeks in Montana. It was the first real vacation we'd had since her surgery, and seeing her laugh, really laugh, was worth every mile. The last leg of the drive is always the best part. You roll down the windows and you can smell the lake before you see it. It's a clean, earthy smell that means you're home. We turned off the county highway and onto our private gravel road, the tires crunching a familiar rhythm. Up ahead, through the dense stand of birch trees my brother Matthew and I planted 2 decades ago, I should have seen the welcoming peak of our roof. Instead, I saw a giant yellow machine. And then I heard it, the sickening crack of splintering wood, followed by the deep groan of a wall giving way. Sarah gasped. Marissa screamed from the back seat, a sharp, terrified sound that cut right through me. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt in a cloud of dust. For a second, my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. A huge backhoe, its metal claw caked with dirt and bits of our siding, was systematically tearing into the west wing of our house. The wing where Marissa's bedroom was. The wing with the big picture window looking out over the water. A man in a hard hat stood nearby, holding a clipboard and yelling directions to the operator. I was out of the truck before it had even stopped rocking, leaving the driver's side door hanging open. I don't remember what I was shouting. It was just a roar, a raw animal sound of pure rage and disbelief. I ran towards the machine, waving my arms like a madman. "Stop! What are you doing? Stop! That's my house!" The man with the clipboard turned, a look of mild annoyance on his face, like I was some pesky stray dog who'd wandered onto his job site. He held up a hand. The machine operator cut the engine, and the sudden silence was somehow worse than the noise. It was filled with the sound of debris settling and Sarah's frantic call from the truck. "Orders from the HOA, buddy," the foreman said. He had a tired, gravelly voice. He tapped his clipboard. "We've got the demolition permit right here. Orders came down last week." I stared at him, my chest heaving. The world felt like it was tilting on its axis. "HOA? What HOA?" I said, my voice shaking with fury. "I'm not in an HOA. My property line is 400 feet that way." I pointed back towards the main road, towards the manicured lawns and identical mailboxes of the Riverbend Creek Community Association, the community I deliberately bought my land outside of 25 years ago. The foreman just shrugged, unimpressed. He flipped a page on his clipboard and angled it towards me. "Says, here you are. Says here you've got an outstanding fine of $70,000 for, let's see, unapproved structural modifications and landscape violations." He squinted at the paper. "Fine's been delinquent for 6 months. The board approved accelerated enforcement. $70,000? I'd never received a single notice. Never attended a single meeting because I wasn't a member. The whole thing was insane." He was holding out a printed demolition permit with the city's official seal at the top and an HOA-issued ledger attached. The numbers were all there, in neat little columns, a fantasy of fines and late fees that had somehow manifested into a real-life nightmare tearing my home apart. I could see right through the hole in the wall, into what used to be our living room. I could see the stone fireplace Matthew and I built by hand, stone by stone, one sweltering summer. This wasn't just a house, it was a memorial. Matthew was a Marine, killed outside of Fallujah. We built this place together on weekends before his last deployment, a promise of a future he never got to see. After his funeral, we spread his ashes right off the end of the dock, letting him become part of the lake he loved so much. Every beam, every nail, was a memory. The porch swing was where Marissa sat for hours after her surgery, slowly regaining her strength. The scratch on the kitchen floor was from her first wobbly steps after they told us she might never walk the same way again. This land wasn't just property. It was sacred ground. It was the only place our family had ever truly felt whole. Now, a stranger with a clipboard was telling me it was being destroyed because of a make-believe debt to a club I never joined. My rage turned into a cold, heavy stone in my stomach. The foreman must have seen the look on my face, because his own expression softened just a little. "Look, man, I'm just doing my job. The order is signed and paid for." He pointed a thick, calloused finger to the bottom of the demolition order. "This is the signature that matters." My eyes followed his finger to the looping, self-important scrawl on the signature line. And the worst part? I recognized it. It was Shelley Wintrow, the same HOA president who tried to fine me for my flagpole 5 years ago. This wasn't a mistake. This was an execution. Seeing that signature was like getting hit by a second wrecking ball. My fight-or-flight instinct, the one that had kept me calm in situations a hell of a lot worse than this, finally gave out. The foreman took a step back, maybe seeing something in my eyes he didn't like. Sarah was there, her hand on my arm, pulling me back from a line I was about to cross. The crew packed up their gear. They'd done the damage they were paid to do. By the time the sun started to set, they were gone, leaving us alone with the gaping wound where our house used to be. This wasn't the first time Shelley Wintrow had tried to make my life difficult. It started almost immediately after she was elected HOA president about 10 years ago. I'd bought my 5 acres of lakefront property long before the Riverbend Creek subdivision was even a blueprint in a developer's office. I paid cash, saved from years of contract work, and built the house myself with Matthew. When the developer started selling lots for the HOA, he made me a standing offer for my parcel, said it would make a great community clubhouse. I politely declined. It was my home. When the HOA was formed, they sent me a welcome packet. I sent them back a certified letter with a copy of my deed and the county parcel map, highlighting in yellow the clear boundary line that put my land well outside their jurisdiction. I figured that was the end of it, but with Shelley, it was never the end. Her first attack was the flagpole. I fly the American flag, and below it the Marine Corps flag, in honor of my brother. She sent me a letter, printed on fancy HOA letterhead, citing a bylaw about unapproved vertical structures and demanding I remove it. I drove to the next town hall meeting, which back then were public, and presented my survey documents to the entire board. I wasn't rude, I just laid out the facts. I was not a member, my property was not subject to their rules, and they were harassing a private citizen. The board, mostly reasonable people at the time, apologized for the misunderstanding. Shelley just sat there, staring at me with a tight plastic smile. A year later, it was the dock. She claimed it violated shoreline aesthetics and sent a notice that the HOA would have it professionally removed at my expense. Again, I sent a letter with copies of my permits from the Department of Natural Resources and another copy of the property survey. I CC'd my lawyer this time. The letters stopped for a while after that. I'd see her at the local grocery store and she'd look right through me, like I didn't exist. I thought she'd finally given up, moved on to harassing some other poor soul about the color of their recycling bin. Now I saw the truth. She hadn't given up. She'd just gone quiet, waiting for the right opportunity, for the moment I was 1,000 miles away and couldn't fight back. She waited for me to leave town, got some bogus permit rubber-stamped by a city clerk who was probably a friend from her book club, and then paid that demolition crew out of the HOA's emergency funds. She'd found a way to bypass certified letters and property deeds. She'd brought a bulldozer to a paper fight. The first call I made was to my insurance agent. I explained the situation, my voice flat and numb. He was sympathetic at first, full of "oh my gods" and "that's terribles." Then I mentioned the HOA. The temperature of the call dropped 20 degrees. "Let me check the policy, Jack," he said. He put me on hold. The tinny music felt like a deliberate insult. When he came back, his voice was all business. "I'm sorry, Jack, we can't cover it." The demolition order cites non-compliance with local maintenance laws, as reported by a governing community association. Under the Governmental Action Exclusion Clause, any damage resulting from the enforcement of an ordinance or law is not covered. I tried to explain that the HOA had no authority, that the laws they cited didn't apply to me. He cut me off. "You'll have to take that up with them. As far as our underwriters are concerned, this was a legally sanctioned action." I hung up the phone. I was on my own. Night fell, and the three of us just stood there in the wreckage. The air was thick with the smell of sawdust and insulation. Sarah was trying to be strong, talking about finding a hotel, but her voice kept breaking. Marissa was silent, a ghost walking through the bones of her childhood home. I sat down on what was left of the front porch steps, a single slab of concrete that had somehow survived. I ran my hands over my face, the grit and dust scraping my skin. I felt a complete and utter failure. I had built this place to keep my family safe, and I couldn't even protect it from a petty tyrant with a clipboard. Then Marissa called my name. Her voice was small. "Dad, look." She was standing near a pile of splintered 2x4s and drywall. In her hands, she held a small, bronze plaque, covered in dust. I had mounted it on the stone mantelpiece over the fireplace. She wiped it clean with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. The engraved letters caught the moonlight. Sergeant Matthew Brenner, USMC, Semper Fi. It was bent at the corner, but it was intact. She held it out to me. Taking it from her, the cold metal felt impossibly heavy. It was all I had left of him, all I had left of this place. And in that moment, the numbness burned away, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. The shock was gone. The grief was gone. All that remained was steel. I looked over at the manicured streetlights of Riverbend Creek, a perfect little kingdom of rules and order. I thought of Shelley Wintrow, sitting in her pristine home, feeling victorious. I held my brother's plaque in my hand and whispered to the empty air, "You picked the wrong damn house, Shelley." Sarah looked at me, her eyes questioning in the dark. I didn't say another word. I stood up, walked over to my truck, and got in. I turned the key, the engine roaring to life in the devastating silence. I knew exactly what I had to do first. I put the truck in gear and drove straight to the county records office. The county records office smells like old paper and weak coffee, a scent I've always found comforting. It's a place of facts, where things are either true or they aren't. There's no room for opinion in a surveyor's map or a notarized signature. After settling Sarah and Marissa into a nearby hotel for the night, I'd driven straight here. The night clerk, a woman named Carol who'd been working the archives since I was in high school, gave me a sad look, but buzzed me in without a question. I knew what to look for. Parcel number, date of sale, developer's signature. I pulled the original plat map for the Riverbend subdivision, dated 23 years ago. There it was, clear as day in black and white. My 5-acre parcel, Lot 1, was outlined with a thick border, separate from the numbered lots of the future HOA. A handwritten note in the margin, signed by the developer himself, read, "Lot 1 sold prior to covenant formation, exempt from all future association bylaws." This was the document I'd built my life on, the one I'd sent copies of to Shelley Wintrow twice before. It was my rock. Holding it in my hands, I felt a flicker of reassurance. I was right. I had the proof. But proof hadn't stopped a backhoe. I started digging deeper. If Shelley had a demolition permit, she needed a legal basis for it. She couldn't just invent one out of thin air. I started pulling the HOA's filings from the last few years. Amendments, meeting minutes, financial statements, anything that was public record. It took me a couple of hours, but then I found it. Filed 2 years ago, almost to the day. It was a revised and restated boundary map for the Riverbend Creek Community Association. It looked official enough. It had the same layout, the same font, the same county seal in the corner. But there was one small, devastating difference. The thick border around my property was gone. Lot 1 was now shaded in the same light gray as every other house in the HOA, seamlessly absorbed into their little kingdom. Attached to the filing were the supposed minutes from an HOA board meeting, where the revision was unanimously approved. The document was signed by Shelley and 2 other board members. It was a complete fabrication. There was no meeting, no vote. It was a quiet, bureaucratic coup, a lie committed to paper and filed away in a dusty basement, waiting for the right moment to be weaponized. Just as I was staring at the forgery, a familiar face appeared at the end of the aisle. It was Kevin, a guy I knew from the VFW who'd been a clerk in the assessor's office for 30 years. He looked over his shoulder before walking toward me. "Jack, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice low and urgent. He gestured at the papers in my hands. "Figured you'd end up here." I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "Let me tell you something off the record," he said, leaning in closer. "They've been trying to claim your lot for years. A 5-acre lakefront property on their books makes the entire subdivision look more valuable. It allows them to inflate the dues for everyone, claiming higher maintenance costs and a bigger community footprint." He shook his head. "They tried it with the old Miller farm on the north end about 6 years back, before you had your run-in over the flagpole. It's a land grab, plain and simple. They file revised paperwork, hope no one notices for a few years, and then it becomes established fact." He told me Shelley's lawyer, the one who reviewed all the HOA documents, was her nephew. A kid fresh out of law school named Brent, who was probably more interested in billing hours than checking facts. This wasn't just incompetence, it was a conspiracy. Kevin also mentioned something else that chilled me to the bone. For the last year, all the HOA board meetings had been held in private, closed-door sessions. No more public access. No more minutes posted online. They had created a black box where they could operate with zero accountability. I left the records office with photocopies of everything: the original deed, the forged map, the fake meeting minutes. The sun was coming up. Instead of going back to the hotel, I drove into Riverbend Creek. I parked down the street from Shelley's house, a perfectly manicured 2-story colonial with an American flag flying from a flagpole that was, I noted, identical to mine. I needed to know if I was the only one. I started knocking on doors. The first few people were polite but skittish. They'd heard the commotion at my place and didn't want any trouble. They'd complain about the HOA in whispers, about the fines for leaving garbage cans out for an extra hour, or for having the wrong shade of flowers in their garden beds. But they were too afraid to do anything. Then I got to Daryl Jensen's house. Daryl was a retired fire inspector, a gruff old Vietnam vet who'd lived in the neighborhood since it was built. He invited me in for coffee. His kitchen table was covered in stacks of paper. It was a mountain of violation notices from the HOA. He showed me one, a fine for $12,000. His crime? He'd planted tomato vines that had grown 2 inches over the edge of the sidewalk. They said it was a public access impediment, he said, his voice a low rumble of disgust. He told me his HOA dues had gone up 400% in the last 18 months. Fines that used to be $50 were now $5,000. People were getting lien notices on their homes for things like having a basketball hoop in the driveway or parking an RV in their own side yard for a weekend. Shelley was running the place like a personal fiefdom, bleeding the homeowners dry with 1,000 tiny cuts. She was using their own money to fund her war against them. I sat there in Daryl's kitchen, listening to story after story of petty tyranny, and all the pieces clicked into place. The forged map wasn't just about grabbing my land, it was about making me an example. If she could take down the one guy who'd always stood up to her, the one guy who wasn't even legally under her control, then no one else would ever dare to question her authority again. She had used the law as her weapon. She had twisted the rules, created a fraudulent document, and made it an official record. In her mind, she had legally absorbed me into her kingdom. I looked down at the forged map in my hands. She had made me a member of the Riverbend Creek Community Association against my will. A different kind of plan began to form in my mind. A better one. A slow smile spread across my face for the first time in 24 hours. Daryl looked at me. "What are you thinking, Jack?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "She went to a lot of trouble to make me a member of her club." I paused, letting the idea settle, feeling the power of it solidify in my gut. If the HOA thinks I'm part of it now, that means I can run for the board. Running for the board was a good idea, but it was slow. It was political. It meant playing a long game on a field Shelley had been rigging for years. It wasn't enough. As I drove away from Daryl's house, the copies of the forged documents on the seat beside me, I knew I couldn't just beat her at her own game. I had to change the game entirely. I had to own the board, the pieces, and the table they were playing on. The original developer of Riverbend Creek was a man named Arthur Vance. He was a tough old rancher who'd sold off most of his land in the late 90s, but had held on to a few undesirable parcels inside the subdivision, swampy, low-lying lots that were no good for building on. He'd passed away a few years back, and I knew his estate was being managed by his daughter down in the city. I knew this because I'd done some electrical work for her years ago on a commercial building she owned. I found her number and called her. I didn't waste time with small talk. I told her I was a landowner adjacent to Riverbend, and that I was interested in making a cash offer on the 12 undeveloped lots her father's estate still held within the HOA. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The ones that flood every spring? What on earth for?" I told her I was looking for a long-term investment. It wasn't a complete lie. The offer I made was fair market value for unusable land, but it was all cash, with a promise to close in 48 hours. For an estate trying to tie up loose ends, it was the perfect offer. Quick, clean, no complications. The next afternoon, I was sitting in a lawyer's office downtown, signing the final paperwork. I walked out with deeds to 12 properties inside the Riverbend Creek Community Association. According to their own bylaws, which I had read cover to cover the night before, voting power was assigned per lot. One lot, one vote. My demolished home, thanks to Shelley's fraudulent map, was one vote. These 12 empty lots were 12 more. Overnight, I had gone from being a non-member to being the single largest voting bloc in the entire association. My next step was to rally the troops. With Daryl's help, I started holding quiet meetings in living rooms after dark. I showed them my new deeds. I laid out the forged boundary map and the fake meeting minutes. I explained how Shelley had used their money to illegally destroy my home. For the first time, these homeowners saw a path to winning. Fear was replaced with anger, and anger with resolve. We formed a voting bloc of 19 households. My 13 votes, plus their 19, gave us a supermajority that couldn't be beaten. The final piece was to follow Shelley's rulebook to the letter. I drafted a petition citing Bylaw 4.3, which allowed any group of 5 or more homeowners to call for a special meeting of the Board of Directors with 10 days' notice. I got my signatures, filed the petition officially with the HOA's secretary, and posted the notice on the community bulletin board just as required. 2 days later, I got a frantic, blustering email from Shelley. The subject line was, "Unauthorized and invalid meeting." She claimed our petition was improper, that a special meeting could only be called by the president, and that the matter was closed. She threatened legal action against anyone who attended. I replied with a single sentence, quoting her own bylaw back to her, and CCing every homeowner in our coalition. The meeting was on. The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. People stood along the back walls. The air was thick with tension. Shelley sat at the head table, flanked by her 2 loyal board members and her nephew lawyer, Brent. She looked smug, confident that she was about to publicly crush this little rebellion. I waited for her to call the meeting to order. As soon as she did, I stood up. "Madam President," I said, my voice calm and even. "Before we address the agenda, I have a point of order regarding voting rights." Shelley scoffed. "You have no right to speak, Mr. Brenner. You are a delinquent member, with an outstanding fine of $70,000. I smiled. "We'll get to that. But first, according to Bylaw 7.2, voting rights are allocated per parcel owned. I'd like the record to show that as of 2 days ago, I am the legal owner of parcels 1 and parcels 14 through 25. I placed the stack of 12 freshly recorded deeds on the table in front of her. A wave of murmurs washed over the room. Shelley's smug expression faltered. She stared at the deeds as if they were snakes. Her nephew Brent leaned over and whispered something in her ear, his face pale. I wasn't finished. I placed the forged boundary map next to the deeds. I'd also like to present the board with this fraudulent document filed 2 years ago without my knowledge, which is the sole basis for the illegal destruction of my home. Then came the final piece. I pulled out my phone and played a short video clip on speaker. It was the demolition foreman, recorded the day I arrived. His voice filled the silent room. "Orders from the HOA, buddy. The order is signed and paid for. This is the signature that matters." Shelley jumped to her feet. "This is all fake. These are fake documents. This is slander." She looked at her nephew. "Brent, tell them." All eyes turned to the young lawyer. He started to bluster, throwing out words like inadmissible and tortious interference. I cut him off. "Brent, as a licensed attorney, did you conduct due diligence on the revised boundary map before your aunt acted on it? Did you verify its authenticity against the original county plat?" He froze, a deer in the headlights. The room was dead silent. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His whole career was flashing before his eyes. With all the power in the room now shifted to my side of the table, I made my move. "I'd like to make a motion," I said, my voice ringing with clarity. "A motion to remove Shelley Wintrow as president of this association, effective immediately, pending a full forensic audit and a criminal investigation into fraud and destruction of property." Daryl Jensen seconded the motion from the back of the room. Shelley screamed, "You can't do this!" "It's just a vote, Shelley," I said. "All in favor?" Hands shot up all over the room. 19 neighbors, plus my own 13 proxy votes held by Daryl. It was overwhelming. The motion passed, 32-3. Her reign was over. She stared at me, her face a mask of disbelief and pure hatred. "I'm calling my lawyer!" she shrieked. I looked her dead in the eye. "You might want to call your insurance too. This is about to get expensive." Winning the vote was just the beginning. Power vacuums are messy, and I knew Shelley wouldn't go quietly. She'd spent years building her little empire, hiding behind bylaws and closed-door meetings. To truly dismantle it, I had to drag everything she'd done out into the sunlight. The very next morning, I called a friend of mine who works as a producer for the local news. I told her I had a story about HOA corruption that was going to make her ratings skyrocket. She was skeptical until I sent her the photo of my demolished house. An hour later, her top investigative reporter was sitting in my hotel room. I laid out everything: the forged map, the fraudulent fines, the 12 deeds. I told her that in 24 hours, the new HOA board, with me as the acting president, would be holding its first ever fully open and transparent public meeting. And I was inviting her news crew to be there. I also had Marissa set up a tripod with a phone to live stream the whole thing on Facebook. No more secrets, no more closed doors. This was going to be public. The next evening, the clubhouse was even more crowded than before. The news camera was set up in the back, its red light glowing like a watchful eye. Every seat was filled, not just with our coalition, but with dozens of other curious homeowners who had heard the rumors and wanted to see the fireworks. I sat at the head of the table where Shelley had presided just a few days earlier. I didn't want this to be just about my word against hers. I needed experts. I needed undeniable, credentialed facts that no one could argue with. So I had brought 3 guests. I introduced the first man, a licensed structural engineer named Mark. He was a no-nonsense guy I'd worked with on a dozen projects over the years. He took the floor and, in simple, clear language, explained that his team had examined the wreckage of my house that morning. He confirmed that the demolition permit issued by the city was based on fraudulent claims of structural instability, claims provided solely by the HOA. He stated unequivocally that the house had been structurally sound, and that the demolition itself had been conducted in an unsafe and unpermitted manner. You could feel the mood in the room shift. This wasn't just a dispute over rules anymore. This was a public safety issue. My second expert was a professional land surveyor. She set up a large display showing the original county plat map side by side with Shelley's forged version. With a laser pointer, she walked the entire room through the discrepancies. She showed where property lines had been digitally altered. She pointed out that the official county surveyor's seal on the forged map was a blurry, low-resolution copy, a clear sign of a counterfeit document. In my professional opinion, she concluded, the revised map, filed by the association, is a deliberate falsification of a legal document. The room started buzzing. People were whispering, pointing. I could see the anger building on their faces. They were realizing that the very foundation of the HOA's authority was built on a lie. My final guest was a forensic handwriting analyst I'd hired from the city. I'd given her a copy of Shelley's signature from the demolition order and a dozen other verified samples of her signature from past HOA documents. She stated, calmly and professionally, that while the signature on the demolition order looked like Shelley's, it was missing several key pressure points and stroke patterns. It was a good forgery, but it was a forgery nonetheless. Then she dropped the bombshell. She had also analyzed the signatures of the other 2 board members on the faked meeting minutes from 2 years ago, the ones approving the new boundary map. Both signatures, she testified, were forgeries, and they bore the distinct handwriting characteristics of the person who had faked Shelley's signature. All the forgeries were done by the same hand. Right on cue. As if she could feel her world crumbling, Shelley Wintrow herself burst through the doors at the back of the room. She was practically vibrating with rage. "This is an illegal meeting. You have no authority," she yelled, marching toward the front. She didn't expect me to be prepared. As she approached the table, I stood up and handed her 2 documents. "This one," I said, my voice amplified by the microphone, "is a cease and desist letter from my attorney, ordering you to stop misrepresenting yourself as an agent of this HOA. And this one is a notice that a civil lawsuit has been filed against you personally for fraud, conspiracy, and the full replacement value of my home, plus punitive damages." Her face went white. Before she could respond, I turned back to the microphone and addressed the homeowners. I held up a thick binder. "For the past year," I began, "you've all seen your dues and fines increase dramatically. Now I'm going to show you where your money went." I read from the HOA's bank statements, which the new board had obtained that morning. Line by line, I detailed the expenses. $9,200 for a master bathroom renovation at the home of S. Wintrow. $12,000 in legal retaining fees paid to Brent Wintrow, $6,000 for executive board retreats at a luxury spa, $1,800 for a series of private stakeholder dinners at the city's most expensive steakhouse. With every line item, a gasp went through the crowd. I was reading the diary of her greed, paid for with their money. A woman in the front row started crying. One of the two remaining board members sitting at the table with me, a man who had clearly been kept in the dark, stood up abruptly and announced his immediate resignation. Shelley looked trapped. Her face was a storm of fury and panic. The news camera was pointed directly at her. Dozens of phones were recording. She turned to leave, to escape the suffocating judgment of the room she once ruled. But her path was blocked. Two uniformed sheriff's deputies had stepped inside the clubhouse. They hadn't been called by me. They had been called by the city clerk's office as soon as they'd been notified of the forged documents. They approached her calmly. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us. We have some questions for you regarding several official complaints of fraud." As they led her out, the local news reporter rushed up to me, shoving a microphone in my face. "This is unbelievable," she said, out of breath. "How did you figure all this out? How did you know how to do all this?" I looked past her, at the faces of my neighbors, a mixture of shock, relief, and gratitude. Then I looked into the camera. "I built things for 40 years, I said. "I know how to take them apart, too." I thought her public humiliation and the fraud investigation would be the end of it. I was wrong. A cornered animal is a dangerous animal, and Shelley Wintrow, stripped of her title and facing legal ruin, was more dangerous than ever. She was out on bail the next day, and true to her nature, she immediately went on the offensive. Her nephew filed a countersuit against me and the new HOA board, a sloppy mess of a document accusing us of defamation, conspiracy, and causing her extreme emotional distress. It was a nuisance suit designed to bury us in legal fees and scare the other homeowners back into submission. But I had expected it. What I didn't expect was for her to stoop to petty criminal sabotage. We were still living in the hotel, but I'd drive out to my property every day, mostly just to stand there and try to figure out where to even begin with the cleanup. I'd set up a new, top-of-the-line security system, the kind contractors use on job sites. 4 high-definition cameras covering every angle of the property, all feeding directly to my phone. One night, around 2 a.m, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I pulled up the live feed. 2 figures, dressed in dark hoodies, were creeping around the back of the wreckage. One was carrying a crowbar, the other a heavy toolbox. They went straight for the well pump that supplied all the water to my property. I watched, my blood running cold, as they pried open the housing and started smashing the delicate machinery inside. Then they moved to the main electrical panel on the side of the property and cut every wire they could see. I recognized one of them immediately. It was Donna Lowell, Shelley's personal HOA enforcement goon. She was the one who used to drive around in a golf cart with a fake security logo on the side, taking pictures of people's lawns. The other figure was a man I didn't recognize. I didn't need to see Shelley's face to know she was behind it. This was her move. Petty, destructive, and cowardly. The old me would have jumped in my truck and driven out there to confront them myself. The new me just sat in my hotel room, calmly took a screen recording of the whole 30-minute event, and saved the high-resolution video to a hard drive. They thought they were operating under the cover of darkness. They had no idea they were the stars of my next exhibit. But as I was watching them, an old instinct kicked in, a bit of battlefield paranoia from my time in the service. If they were hitting my well, what else were they hitting? I remembered the wildlife cameras I'd set up years ago to watch the deer trails in the woods that bordered the Riverbend subdivision. They were small, motion-triggered cams, nearly impossible to spot. I'd almost forgotten about them. I logged into the camera account, my fingers flying across the phone screen. Sure enough, at 1:45 a.m., one of the cameras had been triggered. The footage was grainy, lit only by the moon, but it was clear enough. It showed a familiar SUV pulling over on a side street in the HOA. Shelley Wintrow got out of the passenger side. She spoke to the two figures who then got out of the back. It was Donna and the unknown man. The camera recorded Shelley handing Donna the crowbar and pointing in the direction of my property. It was the smoking gun. The next morning, I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't post the video online. I walked into the sheriff's office with a thumb drive in my pocket and asked to speak to the lead detective on Shelley's fraud case. I played him the footage. He didn't say a word, just watched intently, his expression growing grimmer by the second. When the video of Shelley handing over the crowbar played, he just shook his head and picked up his phone. By lunchtime, Shelley and her two accomplices were in custody, this time for felony trespassing, conspiracy, and destruction of property. With the new criminal charges, her bail was revoked. She wasn't getting out this time. With Shelley officially out of the picture, I could finally execute the last phase of my plan. I had a majority of the land, the trust of the homeowners, and a clear mandate for change. But fixing the HOA wasn't enough. The entire system was broken. The very existence of the organization gave people like Shelley a platform to abuse power. The only real solution was to tear it down to the foundation. I called another special meeting. This time, there was no tension, only a sense of exhausted relief. I stood before my neighbors and laid out a simple proposal, one that was legally permissible under state law, with a 2/3 majority vote. I made a motion to dissolve the Riverbend Creek Community Association entirely. I explained that we could replace it with a simple, voluntary neighborhood watch for security and a shared maintenance agreement for the common areas, funded by a small, fixed annual contribution. No more fines. No more architectural reviews. No more petty tyrants telling you what you could or couldn't plant in your own garden. Just people being neighbors again. The vote was unanimous, with the petition signed by every single homeowner and my majority land share backing it. The legal paperwork was ironclad. We submitted it to the state, and after a short review period, it was approved. Our local state representative even showed up to a small community picnic to personally sign off on the final dissolution charter. The Riverbend Creek HOA was officially dead. Shelley, facing a mountain of criminal charges and civil suits, was ultimately banned by the court from ever holding a position on any community board in the state again. Her power was gone. Her reputation was destroyed. Her little kingdom had been erased from the map. Weeks later, I was standing on my land, by the edge of the lake. The debris had been cleared, but the scar on the earth was still there. My house was gone. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. The land was truly mine again, free and clear. My daughter Marissa walked up and stood beside me. She was quiet for a moment, then she handed me something. It was a piece of salvaged wood from one of the main support beams, the one Matthew and I had set together. On it, in her own careful handwriting, she had written 2 words: "Let's rebuild." And I knew we would. A year can feel like a lifetime. It's also just enough time to rebuild one. I'm sitting on the new porch, watching the morning mist burn off the lake. The house is different now. I built it a little smaller, with a simpler roofline, but the foundation is twice as strong, reinforced with steel rebar you could use to build a bunker. Every joint is glued and screwed. Every window is hurricane rated. It's built to stand. It sits on the exact same footprint as the old one. A quiet act of defiance that says, "We're still here." Sarah is inside, humming in the new kitchen that's almost identical to the old one. Marissa is down at the dock, a place she avoided for months after the demolition, but now it's her favorite spot again. She's stronger than I ever was at her age. She's the one who insisted we paint the front door the same color blue. "Some things shouldn't change," she'd said. She was right. The neighborhood is different too. It's quieter, but in a good way. The anxious quiet has been replaced by a peaceful one. There are no more threatening letters, no more clipboard patrols. Last weekend, Daryl Jensen hosted a neighborhood barbecue. People brought side dishes and their kids rode bikes in the street until dark, and nobody got a fine. The shared tool shed we all pitched in for, a simple pole barn on one of my empty lots, is full of lawnmowers and power washers that anyone can borrow. Instead of violation notices, we have an email chain where someone will post, "Hey, going out of town. Can someone grab my mail?" The fear is gone. It turns out, when you get rid of the people who invent problems just to have something to control, you don't have many problems left. The community is thriving not because of rules, but because of respect. Shelley Wintrow is no longer a factor. After the sabotage attempt, the DA threw the book at her. With the mountain of evidence, the forged documents, the bank records, the security footage, she didn't have a leg to stand on. She ended up taking a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence, but it was still enough. She served time for fraud and conspiracy, and the settlement from her and the HOA's insurance company was more than enough to cover the rebuild, the legal fees, and a lot more. As part of the civil settlement, she is permanently barred from serving on any board of any kind, public or private, in this state for the rest of her life. Her house, the one with the identical flagpole, was sold to pay for her legal debts. A nice young family from Ohio bought it. They seemed to like tomatoes. With some of the money from the settlement, I did something Matthew would have appreciated. I started a small legal aid fund, managed by a lawyer I trust, specifically for veterans in our county who are getting pushed around by HOAs, City Hall, or any other bureaucracy that thinks rules are more important than people. I've met too many good men and women who fought for their country only to come home and have to fight for their own property. They're not looking for a handout, just a fighting chance. It's a small thing, but it feels right. It feels like taking the worst thing that ever happened to my family and turning it into a shield for someone else's. The biggest change, though, is down by the water. Last month, on the anniversary of Matthew's death, Marissa and I walked down to the dock with a new sign I'd carved myself out of a solid piece of oak. It's simple, with dark, burned-in letters. We fastened it to the post at the end of the dock, where it can be seen from the water. It just says 2 words, Lake Matthew. It's not an official name you'll find on any map, but the people who live here know what it means. It's a memorial that can't be torn down. The local news did a follow-up story a few months ago. The reporter who'd been there that chaotic night in the clubhouse came out and interviewed me on the new porch. The story was titled, "How One Homeowner Took Down a Rogue HOA." It got a lot of attention, and for a while, I got calls and emails from people all over the country telling me their own stories. They all had a Shelley of their own. As I sat there, talking to the reporter, she asked me the same question she had before. How did I know what to do? I thought about it for a second. I looked at the solid beams above my head and the clean, straight lines of the home I had built twice. I thought about the stacks of blueprints and schematics I'd spent my life reading. Everything in the world, from a house to an HOA, has a plan. It has points of strength and points of weakness. They tried to bury me in fines and paperwork, a flood of paper designed to make you give up, but I knew where the real blueprints were buried.